Hi, everybody, and welcome to this little Avassa and OPA-Styra demonstration. It's actually a little demo that came out of a local meetup we did together, and it's a way of showing the Avassa platform together with OPA and DAS working together that resonated really well. So we said, let's actually record this and get it out there. And I'm joined today by my colleague Fredrik Jansson, who's one of our systems engineers, and also by Anders Eknert, our OPA czar and regional expert here. That was also part, of course, of the meetup. And what we put together here, guys, is a demo around the concept of a movie theater chain. So we're going to show you how to set up 100+ sites with an application that just so happens to have an integrated OPA in it, because it is an application that decides whether a local movie theater can list and or show movies. And of course, we're going to use the beautiful expressiveness of Rego to express some rules around that, and we'll do that based on the geographical locations on each of these sites. And we're going to first deploy that application to all the sites, and then we're going to show you a little bit about the rules themselves. We're going to update the rules a little bit to roll out the movies. And then we're going to be reminded by Anders that we are running a somewhat old version of OPA and that we should switch to a newer version. And we'll conclude by showing you how to do a sweeping upgrade of OPA across 100+ sites from a single and central location. So this will be great. And hopefully there's a lot of cool technical details here that you guys will appreciate. And with that, I'm going to hand over to my dear colleague, Fredrik.
Thank you. So what you see right here is our control tower, the UI for the movie theater, where they're going to onboard their movie theaters. And I'll go straight into that. So I'm going to use a script to onboard 100 sites into this demo. So I'm going to start that here. As you can see, as that progresses, I'll just briefly show you an important feature for the sites here. Each of the sites that we onboard, we actually label with 2 labels. So each site gets a region label and a country label. And these labels are important when we move into the DAS later to look at the Rego rules, because we're going to use these labels to set to allow or disallow listing and watching of movies. So shortly, we should have all the sites onboarded here. So now we have all our 100 movie theaters onboarded into the system. As you can see, they're distributed around the world. The first thing I need to do to get the open policy agent to be able to call back into the Styra DAS is I need to get a token from the DAS. And the way I do that is I'll go into here and I go into the install section. And this actually gives me a token that I can use and give to OPA once it starts. And that will allow it to get the configuration for the DAS and then call home and get its rules. So I'll copy this. I'll put it into our secure vault that I call operations. And here I have an OPA token. And I will just replace none here with the actual token. So this will later allow the application by using this token to go to DAS and get its configuration. So with that in place, I'm going to define the application and just briefly walk you through what it looks like. So here we have the application specification, which defines what our application looks like. And there are 2 containers at work here. The first one is the Digital Assets Manager, which is basically a web server that's going to respond to requests to list and show movies. And most importantly, here we have the Open Policy Agent. And the way, again, as I mentioned before, with a token, the OPA can call home. And the way we get configuration into the Open Policy Agent is we basically run the curl command that you could see in this whole section, but we do inject the secret token from our vault into this init container. And once this runs, it's going to output the OPA configuration file. So the secret is mounted into the file system using this. So it basically says from credentials, vault operations, mount that secret token into the file system. And then we basically do a cat on that and have curl go to Styra to get the configuration. And once that configuration is in place, we simply start OPA and we point to this configuration file. And again, once OPA starts, it's going to call home and talk to the Styra DAS. So let me save this application. Briefly, we will see that we are now downloading the two images, one from our internal repo and the Open Policy Agent from Docker. And momentarily here, you can see that we now have these two containers available. So that brings us to the next step, where I'm going to take this application and deploy it across all the movie theaters. And I'll do that by giving it the deployment name. I'm just going to reuse the same name and say I want to deploy our application, Theater Room Manager, across all sites that match this expression, which happens to be all the sites in the system that are not part of the control plane. So once I hit save here, the system will actually go to each site and instruct it to start the application we just defined. And to see what's going on here, we can look at the events. And here we can see site by site what it's actually doing. So momentarily here, the sites will have downloaded the images and will start the application. So here you can see the events flashing by, and if you wonder why some say stop, that is actually the init container where we run the curl command to get the OPA conf. So we run that once, it downloads the configuration, then we stop it and move on with the rest of the containers. So at this very moment, we have it up and running, and we should be good to go. So that said, I'm going to move into the Styra DAS and give it to Anders to explain what you actually see here.
Right. So yeah, so this will be your policy then per movie theater. So yeah, so the way our policies are structured in Rego, the language for which we build policies for OPA, is that pretty much the same structure as a real world policy. A policy is basically a set of rules. So that's also what a Rego policy is. So in the policy we see here in front of us, we have two rules. There's one rule called watch movie, and there's one rule called list movies. So those are the two rules we have to work with here. And the way OPA evaluates rules, and then kind of the anatomy of a rule here. If you see the watch movie rule, you can see that watch movie rule, the way we can read that is watch movie is equal to true if, and then if all the conditions listed inside of the rule, like inside of those curly brackets, we call that the body of the rule. So if all the conditions inside of the body are true, then we say that the rule is true. So the return value in this case is true, but it could be any return value which is valid JSON. So we could return a string, we could return a list of objects, perhaps it could be obligations or anything really. But in this case, we return a Boolean value. And if all the conditions are not true in the rule, then by default, we just say that the rule is undefined. So if we want to ensure that there's always something returned, we commonly use these default, the default construct, as you can see there. So in case the conditions are not true, we will always return something. And in this case, we return false. So no matter what input we provide, watch movie and list movies are either true or false. And in this case, we do quite a simple comparison. So the watch movie rule will be true if the country provided in the input is equal to Sweden. And the list movies rule is equal to true if the region is equal to Europe. But of course, we could add any type of conditions or checks in these rules. We might want to add time or date based. Maybe we can't watch movies on Sundays because in some countries that's when you're supposed to be in church, or things like that. So there's over 150 built-in functions provided with Rego, and you can use any number of data sources like calendar data. It could be user stores, external permission systems, and so on.
Awesome, thank you. So just briefly, I'm going to show you what this looks like once we start interacting with a theater room manager. And for that, I'm actually going to go into a terminal. So first thing I want to show you is, for example, if we go to a site that's in Sweden, there I expect to be able to watch movies. The way I'll do that is I'll use our command line tool to look at the instance of the application in a site called Solna that I know is in Sweden. So here I go into applications, theater room manager, service instances, and what I'm looking for is this IP address called this IP address. And by having that IP address, I can issue curl commands to this one, which happens to be 96. And the first thing I want to show you is that I can actually list movies in Sweden, because remember the rule said that if we're in Europe and Sweden is in Europe, we can list movies. So here I expect to get a JSON payload back with the movies we actually have in the system. And I can also watch a single one of those because Solna is in Sweden again, and in Sweden we can actually show movies. So now if I, instead of Solna, choose a different site, so instead of this one, we can, for example, look at Edmonton. And if I use the 240 address, I actually expect this to fail because Canada is not part of Europe. So according to the rules, you can only list movies if you're in Europe. So this one will actually return a 403 forbidden. Now, if we want to allow any country, for example, to watch movies, I can actually add. I can actually make this one true, for example. So even though a site doesn't match this one, it will fall back and return true anyhow. And here is the really cool thing. Once I hit publish here, since OPA is called home to the DAS, it will actually pick up this change and re-implement the rules. So if I do the same curl here, It might take a few seconds for it to download the new rules, but pretty quick here, we should actually see that I'm getting a response, and here you get it. So now I simply changed the rule in the DES, and that rule was sent out to all the sites, and all of a sudden I can list movies in Edmonton. And surprise to no one, I think, I still can't watch movies here because watching movies I can only do in Sweden. So hopefully that gives you it's a good introduction to how you can use OPA distributor across 100 sites, and how well that works with a Styra DAS platform to distribute rules and update rules on the fly.
Yeah, so another thing you might want to look at is the decision log for that system. So if you go right, so all these decisions that your OPAs took, they got reported back to DAS, and the decision log, like this overview, will allow you to search for any decisions made by any OPAs in any systems you might have. And of course, you can use this to filter for specific decisions and so on. But normally, you're mostly interested in why something was denied, for example. So using this, you can kind of zoom into a specific decision and see that here's the input that was provided, and from this we can probably extract that. Of course, Canada was not in Europe, so hence why the decision was denied.
Cool. So, Anders, I want to ask you this. So I know that I deployed a fairly old version, or not the most recent version of OPA, right? So 0.33.0. So you really recommended me to upgrade this to a later version, right?
Yeah, of course. You wanna run on the latest stable.
So I'll found this guy 0.34.2 rootless. And do you want to say anything about rootless before I?
Yeah, I think the rootless container should probably be the default, but for like legacy reasons, it's hard to change. So there's a version which runs OPA as a normal user rather than as root. So that would be the preferred version, unless you have specific reasons not to. But
got it.
Yeah. But it should work as any other. It should work just as the root version.
And I also vote for upgrading to that, Fredrik, if you need additional input here. I think you should go ahead and do that all across the entire setup.
So I'll do that. I'll change the app spec to the later version. And if I go into deployments here and look at the timestamps, what I will see happening here is once the old ones come by, you can actually, so I'm going to stop the scrolling here. You can actually see for each site, we're stopping the old OPA container, and then we're restarting it on the new version. So by this simple change, you can actually see the OPAs getting upgraded as we speak across all the sites.
I remember the application actually had two containers, right? So what you're doing is just restarting the OPA container, right? And the other one is going to keep running. Yeah,
that's correct. So
does that actually mean that we go through the same init container process here?
It does. We're actually going to rerun the init container for since OPA needs that configuration file. We're actually going to rerun that and rerun the OPA container with that configuration.
That's pretty cool. So we reuse the distributed token, and we then reauthorize and download or reconnect to the DAS.
Yes.
Awesome. In a single operation, right?
In a single operation.
Yeah.
And here you will see momentarily, once the container is fully upgraded, it has reached back to OPA. It's actually up and running again and behaves as expected.
Cool. So now we're in line with Anders' expectations too. That's a good side effect.
That's not a bad thing.
keep the vendors happy. So thank you very much, Fredrik and Anders. So, well, in summary, what we did was that we stood up 100+ sites as a distributed edge. We installed OPA, had them call home using the bearer token that we received out of the DAS, be configured centrally with a set of policies, and then we carefully rolled out some select movies through certain regions. And then on the direct suggestion, we upgraded to the most recent and more secure version of OPA in a centralized fashion. That is really, really cool. So nice. Thank you a lot, Fredrik, for the nice demo, and thank you, Anders, for giving us some color and some insights here on the Rego language and how that applies here. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.